Error. Unrecognized command. Please specify. Disable from one preset, Scifi, I interjected, my eyes narrowing towards the track in front of me, and the unrendered obstacles that stood in the way between here and, well, here. Acknowledged. Alert. From 1. Free range of motion preset 1. Disabled. Reset default configs. Resetting default configuration. Alert. HPMM mode active. Alert. No profile loaded. No parameters set. Specify performance parameters. Preset values. Smart auto adjustment or manual value settings. The Eevee chimed in flawlessly, mirroring the system prep for the first marathon. The considerations of the past competition were now completely out the window. There was no longer a need to pit muscle against muscle this time around, and fairness would have to be tested in a completely different playing field. It was the whimsical power of magic against the indomitable power of technology now. A test of the divergent fundamentals that forged two vastly different civilizations. The training wheels are coming off, I began, as the collapsible menu expanded into a whole slew of specialized activity profiles, visualized as a series of nodes floating in three-dimensional space, each of which branched out into a spiderweb of options, representing even more niche specializations. This was complemented by a series of virtual sliders, mimicking a vehicle's control panel, one that allowed an operator to finely tune the exoskeleton to within a razor's edge of optimized performance, giving a breadth and depth of customization that will make even the most seasoned HPUV enthusiast blush. We're going with preset value D5E, I continued, as the Eevee highlighted that particular node and its subcategory in three-dimensional space. Acknowledged. Engaging D5E. Not a second later, I felt a massive weight being lifted off my shoulders, and my arms, and my legs, and most definitely my back as well, as the exoskeleton frame that encased the fleshy human within finally started to pull its own weight, beyond just compensating for the weight of the armor. Everything felt fluid again, for lack of a better word. With every movement, every action, from fine to gross motor, overcompensated and back to high spec. It felt like I was piloting the armor again, rather than just exerting my own strength with it. Not to mention against it, like the night of the warehouse explosion. I couldn't help but to limber up as both training and force of habit began taking over. This was in spite of the exoskeleton systems checklist being marked optional rather than critical this time around. From gauging fine motor control through finger-to-palm tests, to static run tests and what most would see as jumping jacks to gauge both gross motor and multi-axial accelerogeometric systems respectively, I ran through all of them with eagerness and excitement. Though more than out of habit, it was a necessity to just get my brain reattuned to pilot mode. After 2 solid hours of moving with the suit at my own strength, getting back in the groove was both necessary and satisfying. I could have just not done it. But these protocols and reattunement safety procedures, RSPs, existed for a reason. Just relying on Eevee to fill in my stumbles while I got back in the groove was possible, but using it as a crutch was something I wasn't about to do if I could help it. If you're going to be a power-armored specialist, a pilot or an operator of any sort of vehicle or machine, you better make sure it's you who's at the helm, Emma. If not, then why bother having a pilot at all? Why not just send a fleet of SAMCPs? I would not and could not just let the words of the most renowned power-armored specialist of the century go unheeded. The Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts. The Hall of Champions. Spectator stands. Local time 1100. Thacia. There were many questions to be had with regards to Emma's physical capabilities, many of which had far-reaching implications that beckoned a lingering question that I wished to pose, but had yet to, out of a mix of respect and a lack of instigating forces. Exactly what sort of being was lurking beneath the plates of steel? The answer couldn't have been too monstrous. That much was a given, especially considering the constraints of the suit. The morphology in question also could not have been too far off the standard fare of most other beings. But whilst the answer could be estimated through logical deduction, that didn't stop curiosity from taking hold, and my imagination from going into avenues that...
"Any final additions to this gentlemanly wager?"
the Venerian announced with a deafening shrill, though a voice amplification spell that was as disruptive as it was infuriating. I had tried my best to ignore his antics up to this point.
"No? Then the pool stands at a grand total of 10,214 sovereigns."
However, it was becoming clear that such a feat would be impossible. I took note of the Venerian's antics in full now, eyeing him as he took hold of the impromptu purse from a Tholin and began returning to his little picnic table. With a few well-placed steps, I quickly found myself sitting across from the Venerian, who seemed to take my presence with an otherwise nonplussed expression.
"Is there anything I can help you with, Princess?"
A quick deployment of a privacy screen followed, as the crowd was quickly consumed by the participants' warm-ups and the Professor's preparations. "Pray tell, Lord Rolaria, when exactly did you choose the path of an opportunistic bookkeeper?" I inquired, in no uncertain terms, prompting the Venerian to shift his expression to one that was decidedly more measured.
"You derive both my station and my honor with such sentiments, Princess."
"Well, you seem to consistently resist the agreed trajectory of this peer group," I snapped back.
"You know, as well as I, that this isn't about the money. This sum is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. This,"
he shook the bag, taking great effort to do so,
"is about making a statement. Social gains can only do so well when you only have the air you breathe to back up your words. It is only when people feel the consequences of their words, preferably in the cold and heavy article of minted gold, will they finally understand it intrinsically. In short, words are cheap, Princess, and I wish to remind those that may stand against us that there is a tangible price to pay for petty verbal attacks on our group."
Amidst a desire to reinforce our status as a competitive force, I presume.
"Exactly."
I took a breath, palming my beak. "This is a dangerous game you're playing, Lord Rolaria. We are already in the spotlight as it is."
"We will always be in the spotlight as a result of our circumstances. It is best that we choose to embrace it, so that we may at least control the course of its narrative."
"By choosing a path that will surely instigate more animosity?"
"Such a fate is inevitable," the Venerian shrugged. "It's best that we are able to direct what form that animosity takes, and what benefits we can gain from it, than allow another party to dictate it for us. I understand your reluctance, Princess, seeing as you have been playing a game of survival whereby embracing passivity is a cornerstone of your strategies, if not an end goal. But the war we find ourselves in necessitates spontaneity and active decision-making."
"You think too much like a Nexian, Lord Rolaria," I countered bluntly, never breaking from his gaze. "And while your tactics may hold water when you fight on your lonesome, you forget the composition of the vast majority of this peer group's constituents. So while you may have the Nexian advantage for your case, the same cannot be said for the peer group at large." The Venerian finally went silent at that, coinciding with Professor Chiska's loud clap that brought all eyes back to the field.
"The Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts. The Hall of Champions. Competitors Field. Local time 1100. Emma."
"And this will be all the students participating in today's final exercise?" Chiska inquired loudly, bringing all other accessory conversations to a close with a wide and fangy grin. Silence was once again her answer. An answer which clearly brought her a great deal of frustration, as her eyes skimmed across the half-filled track, consisting of just over half of the year group. "All right then." She breathed in deeply, somehow finding it in her to maintain that excitable demeanor. "This next challenge will not be as simple as the last," the professor began, as she lowered her tone to one teetering between threatening and playful. Both the difficulty and complexity of these next trials have been scaled up in fairness and in respect to your magical abilities. You will not find discrete challenges this time around, or at least not in the regimented manner in which the unaugmented trials were conducted. For what awaits you is a gauntlet, a series of trials connected by an overarching challenge, tied together in a cohesive narrative representative of the theatre of life. I flinched for a moment upon hearing that line, as I turned back towards the stands, and saw Eleanor shooting me an unfettered grin and a cheeky wink. Princes and princesses, lords and ladies, cadet. The professor paused awkwardly at that, before moving on swiftly after. It is my honor to present to you the Encabulator's Gauntlet. The professor gestured at the former marathon track, or more specifically, at the various unrendered sections that began stretching, elongating, and growing, causing the Eevee to have another mild existential panic. It was around this time that the tarp covering the mysterious device sitting in the middle of the field was finally removed, though upon closer inspection it was clear this wasn't by intention, as the artifice underneath it had simply outgrown it, the tarp falling to the wayside as whatever was underneath grew into a literal castle. Or, at least, a miniature one, like someone had scaled down a castle into a large 3-story home. Mana radiation spikes assaulted my senses until finally, the whole stadium eventually settled into its final form. Behold! Chiska announced, leaping up towards the castle, perching atop its 3-story high towers. The work of the mythic Encabulator, courtesy of Professor Pliska, our dear armourer, with a little bit of help from yours truly. I don't often get to pull this out of storage, but it was clear to me that your year group warranted it. She winked, taking a few seconds to emphasize that point. In front of us was a gauntlet, all right. The marathon track was still there, albeit elongated and punctuated by what seemed to be different stations. Each of these were vastly different, some even resembling segments and tracks of levels pulled straight out of a video game. The whole scene looked like it had been pulled out of some kit-bashed VR world, and it was only after we truly soaked it all in did Chiska finally explain what all of this was. In front of you is a combined endurance and strength challenge. The distances between each station will be a challenge of endurance in and of itself, whilst the stations themselves are designed with strength-based challenges in mind. You will encounter specific challenges which you must overcome in order to pass through each station. What they are and what they entail I will not spoil. What I will say, however, is that they are to be accomplished in whichever way you see fit, under the overarching rules of physical education, which I will remind you of now. The professor paused before projecting yet another blackboard in front of us, one that, similar to Article's class, had floating chalk that dictated everything she spoke. Rule number 1. The use of magic is allowed only through the augmentation of one's own body as a physical medium. In other words, the use of magic to directly modify one's environment is strictly prohibited. This is a fundamental principle of physical education. This is the only class that primarily explores the implementations of magic through a physical, corporeal medium, that being your bodies. Enhance your strength, endurance, agility, and more, but keep traditional magic out of physical education, please. The professor practically pleaded, as it was clear that this was probably one of those rules that always fell on deaf ears. Rule number 2. The use of one's mana fields to anticipate obstacles or attacks, magical or otherwise, is not only allowed, but encouraged. This is obvious, but due to past events, it must be stated for the record. Chiska practically muttered that last line out, before moving on just as quickly. Rule number 3. The use of natural latent gifts is strictly prohibited. This includes such things as flight, flame breath, and unconventional swimming, amidst other self-evident gifts that none of you seem to possess, so I shall move on. But just because I can't help myself, we will be having a special class for natural latent gifts, so watch out for that. She winked, making eye contact with Thacia, Eleanor, Ladona, Erit, and the few other winged and latent gifted members of the class. Thoughts of the flight pack module being useful in flying exercises slammed into me like a sack of bricks, intruding into my otherwise focused mind, just before the professor rounded out her announcements. And rule number 4, no astral projections, please. With a deep breath, she leaped down from the castle and back towards us. There will be a total of 5 stations. For students not part of any competition, should you fail one station, you may choose to yield and move on to the next station. For students who are part of a competition, the professor eyed both me and Norris. You must complete all 5 stations. But do not worry, for there are many ways in which you can complete a station, some of which may be more obvious than others. She snickered and winked. However, should both of you tie on all 5 stations, the deciding factor will come down to time. The one who takes the least amount of time shall be the uncontested winner in such a case. The professor gestured towards the track, noting how it had changed drastically. It seemed as if it was no longer a track, but rather a well-defined path that had a definitive end. The castle. The EV guesstimated that the whole track was now at least a solid 10 or so kilometers, though, worryingly, it provided a little caveat in the form of a warning I had yet to see before. This estimate is accurate as per current sensor data. Actual distance may vary, depending on developing anomalies. With a few more words of encouragement, and an assurance that any mishaps will be intercepted before grievous injury, we found ourselves poised at the starting line. About a click ahead of us was what seemed to be a town gate. A quick zoom in by the EV showed what looked to be a single barefoot guard in full gear, waiting at each of our respective gates. No other indication of what this challenge was could be made out from a distance. As a result, I took a moment to compose myself, craning my head over to my competitor only once, and incidentally locking eyes with him through my opaque lenses. A look of cocksure confidence and a renewed sense of vitality was all I saw. It was as if the man had forgotten all about the unaugmented challenges, hedging all of his bets on magic. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous, Evie, I muttered out loud. This system is designed to assist with any and all tasks. I will provide pertinent advice as the situation develops, and suggest motor overrides if necessary. Noted, thanks, I responded. Are we all ready, students? Chiska came in, interrupting that little pep talk. Yes, Professor! They all spoke in unison, led by Quiv, and then interrupted by Ladona. Ready as we'll ever be to set the record straight, and to put the insolent in their place. She beamed out a cheerleader's smile, to the tune and cadence of a cheer captain's musically inclined voice. The professor ignored this, and made sure to curtail any and all claps, snickers, and uproarious cheers from the competitors. Though this didn't mean the crowd in the stands weren't riled by her words, especially with Eleanor's whole betting gambit making them even more invested than before. Ignoring this, and focusing on the task at hand, I shifted my posture, poised to just book it. On your marks, Chiska shouted, raising her hand high. Get set! Her fingers contorted, poised for a snap. Go! Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected, 200% above background radiation levels. A loud, thunderous snap echoed throughout the enlarged stadium. And just like the first time, all hell broke loose. Though this time it came first in the form of the sheer glut of mana radiation warnings that the EV thankfully kept nestled into its little folder. The real chaos, however, soon followed, as despite the more things changed, the more they stayed exactly the same. As student after student began blazing forwards, absolutely smoking my already speedy start that would have put even the most competitive of Olympic athletes to shame by leagues and bounds, I found myself left in the literal dust this time around. At least, for a few seconds, that is. As about half of the 50 or so participants quite literally tumbled forwards, and about half of those found themselves on shaky feet, and wobbling on unbalanced gaits. They all looked and acted in a way that was eerily familiar. They all looked like they were newbies in power armor, having gone for high-performance maneuverability mode without any prior training. The infamous hazing ritual. They looked like me when I first put on the suit. And just like my first day of training, they all fell flat on their faces moments after hitting speeds that their bodies either weren't used to or built for. Thud! Thump! Thump! A good quarter of the class found themselves lying face first atop either a pile of down feather pillows or a solid memory foam-like mattress, all courtesy of Chiska. The organic body, no matter how magical, just wasn't designed to handle speeds like that without training. And it was clear that the first few seconds of the competition more or less weeded out those that had some prior physical training to push above and beyond the limits of normal biomechanics, and those that simply knew how to enhance their bodies to that speed. Unsurprisingly, none of the recently fallen got up to continue the race. This left the rest of us to close in on the distance between the starting line and the town gate. About half the distance was covered in just under a minute, as I turned to see the top percentile. Quiv, Thalmin, Ping, and Gumigo in the lead alongside me. Each of them seemed to have their own unique methods in how they handled what biomechanical scientists called the normofunctional limits, though each of the techniques on display were fundamentally different from how I handled it, which made sense considering the slight size differential between my own body and the power armor, which, while slight, was still significant enough that I adopted what power armor specialists refer to as the glide motion, that would have just not worked outside of power armor at typical human speeds. Thalmin took long, springy strides with his digitigrade legs. Quiv did the opposite, but still kept up reasonably well. I couldn't even begin to describe how Gumigo was doing it, only that it reminded me of those surprisingly fast alligator waddles. Ping. It looked almost as if he was galloping, and it was clear that he was giving it his all, as we found ourselves once more locking eyes, prompting the both of us to leave our competition in the dust. Meter by meter, we left the top percentile behind. Booted hooves and metallic feet competed in a league of their own, as the sounds resembling a horse's gallop and a construction site dominated the front of the race. Clop, clop, clop. Ka-thunk, ka-thunk, ka-thunk. You could practically hear the pneumatics, if it wasn't drowned out by the sheer heft that came with the territory of heavy metal coming into contact with solid ground, over and over and over again, at blistering speeds. This neck-to-neck sprint culminated in our arrival at our respective gates, as we were quickly approached by the bear-like guard, who addressed us almost exactly at the same time. And in the same voice, too. "Ha! Adventurer! The town gate is stuck in place. Please, if you wish to continue, you must lift the gates open by your own strength." I hesitated, turning to the professor in order to address the copy-pasted NPC guard. But before I could even manage to address it, Ping was already going to town with the gate, lifting it using his bare hands, gripping its lower lattices, managing to pull it up about waist height, and making certain to show off as he did so. It was clear he was barely even exerting himself this time around, even if what he was lifting was clearly a solid wrought iron gate that looked like it weighed a literal metric ton, or several. So, without addressing the NPC, I quickly jumped at the gate, crouched down, and began lifting what the EV was noting to be a solid chunk of metal that clocked in at about the same weight as a classic motorcycle. Yet the more and more I lifted it, the more the gate seemed to increase in weight, going from motorcycle to compact car, and ending up weighing about as much as a mid-sized sedan by the point I managed to lift it up and above my head. An audible ka-clonk confirmed that it had latched into place. This, in turn, elicited more than a fair few astonished looks from the runners who'd just arrived on scene, as whispers abounded every which way. Did she just... Yes. Without a disturbance or an ebb or a flow in the manifold. Yes. Monster. Amazing work, adventurer. You may now proceed... I was already booking it by the time the NPC had registered what had happened, as I managed to catch up to the ball, who'd opened up the gate just seconds earlier. Though seconds was what this whole competition seemed to be boiling down to now, considering the speeds and strengths which we were working with. The next station was another few clicks ahead of us, the EV zooming in to reveal what looked to be a troll, positioned on each of our lanes, each of them holding solid-looking clubs. In spite of that, there seemed to be a distinct lack of any obstacles. At least, that seemed to be the case, until we reached about halfway towards the NPCs.
"Halt, or you shall meet your doom in ash and cinder!"
The troll Gar shouted in unison, with my Gar shouting just a little bit earlier, owing to the small edge I had on ping speed. Whilst I could have gone above and beyond, completely smoking him in the process, there were three main reasons why I kept at relative parity for now. 1. The practical. Going Ultra Turbo mode would have just revealed my max settings, and the ultimate cap of my capabilities, which may prove to be a concern for future PA classes, and more concerningly for those observing my abilities with less than benign intentions. 2. The situational. The repairs I made to the lower portion of the suit were solid, but I didn't want to tempt fate just yet. 3. The contextual. It was clear that these little stations were triggered by our presence, and each of them held surprises. It was better to have Ping either trigger them first or alongside me, at least for the less obvious ones. And it was clear my concerns for Point 3 were justified, as several mana radiation warnings and a few stern slams of the troll's clubs caused the track to elongate yet again. Except this time, what emerged behind them was a massive chasm of what looked to be lava, but on closer inspection was just water heated to the same temperatures as a hot spring. Several platforms made of stone emerged from the lava, as it became clear just what our challenge was for this round. Or at least, that's what I thought. As 4 other shapes emerged seemingly from the dirt itself, shaped from clay, and given life through some unknown means. These 4 shapes were molded into a family of bears, with 2 fully grown adults and 2 bear cubs. "Please help us! These horrible beasts are preventing us from reaching the castle!" All 4 of them spoke in unison, more or less confirming their status in this whole challenge as just an extra layer of both immersion and directional prompts in this overarching narrative. Ping tried his hand at this first, attempting to usher the family forwards, but finding it absolutely grueling, with the father bear slowing down his pace to a crawl. "Oh, no, the heat is far too intense for me."
"It's not even raw lava, just get across, you insolent little worm," he seethed.
But instead of a proper response, all he received back was yet the same rehashed line.
"Oh, no, the heat is far too intense for me."
"Ah!"
Ping yelled loudly, practically spitting on the NPC's face, garnering naught a reaction but a 1,000-yard blank stare. "You may find it easier to help the family by lifting them above the heat of the lava, Lord Ping," Chiska chimed in from the castle, her voice reaching us through some weird magical PA system. The fact that they were bears made all the more sense now. Their weight turned this station into an endurance strength challenge, combined with some agility as well. However, it was around this point that I figured out something, as Chiska's earlier comments hit me like a sack of bricks. "Professor?" "Yes, Cadet Booker?" "The only condition for their safe crossing is to avoid them from either falling or being singed by the lava, correct?" "That is correct." A devious plan started forming, as I turned inwards once again. "Evie?" "Yes, Cadet Booker." "Calculate the weight and dimensions of these 4 targets, and predict an optimal trajectory across the chasm." "Calculations complete. All 4 targets are capable of being launched successfully." "Good," I muttered out, as I began by grabbing the mother bear, lifting her up and holding her in the same way I'd hold an oversized mega football. Ping, and indeed the rest of the class, stared on in abject confusion as I took a few steps back and began running. A few course corrections and speed adjustments were done courtesy of the Eevee, as I felt the moment we skidded to a halt, and the exact point in which the bear left my arms. The NPC didn't even flinch at this, remaining taut and aerodynamic, as much as a bear could at least, until she landed on the other side face first, skidding to a halt on the dirt outside the track.
"Thank you, adventurer!" I heard a muffled voice responding from beneath an inch of dirt, prompting me to move on to the papa bear. It was around this point that Oris, taking note of my idea, started copying it, lifting up the mother bear without a second thought. The running start this time around consisted of the both of us running at full speed towards the banks of the lava chasm, before lobbing the large bear forward at a decent enough speed that he just barely made it across. "Thank you, adventurer!"
His larger mass made it just possible, if only just, which meant he landed just on the banks of the lava pit. However, despite making it across, he remained as prone and as stiff as he was in mid-flight, which caused him to slowly begin slipping into the lava feet first. He didn't seem to mind this, at least not until his feet started to become singed.
"Oh, no, the heat is far too intense for me!"
He spoke up again, the heat seemingly reanimating him and prompting him to crawl fitfully away from the lava. With the parents done, I turned to my last two subjects, with what probably looked like sinister intent given the unfeeling visage of the helmet. The young cubs. This left me with two radically different choices. I decided not to play football with the cubs. Instead, I took each of them underneath my arms, before making my way towards the stone platforms as I began hopping my way across the lava.
"Ow, ow, ow, too hot, too hot, too hot!"
they both exclaimed, prompting me to quickly change tactics, plonking them instead atop of my shoulders as they both piggybacked their way across the lava lake. Oris, however, decided to lob both of his cubs in the same way we did their parents. However, he was able to do this with greater speed when compared to the adults due to their size, and was even able to give them a bit of a spin as well, in the same way you spin a football. The man would have made a great football player if things had been different. However, as it stood, we were both back in the race, as I plonked down the two bears next to their parents, and as Oris simply ran past his family, which were all in varying degrees buried beneath the dirt.
"Thank you for saving our family, adventurer!"
They all collectively spoke, just out of earshot, my rear-view camera showing them waving back in an uncanny unison. We moved forward at breakneck pace, booted hooves and industrial clunks, once more dominating the background noise of the track. It was around this point that I began testing the waters of Ping's capabilities by incrementally increasing my speed. Rather surprisingly, the man was able to match it with seemingly little effort. This back and forth eventually landed us just short of the third station now, as what appeared to be a sheer-faced wall now awaited us. Little outcroppings, the same ones you see at a rock climbing setup, made it clear what this challenge was. However, that wasn't the most surprising part about this whole setup. A brief analysis of the wall, courtesy of the Eevee, revealed an anomalous surge of mana radiating throughout it. I paid no mind, and neither did Ping, as he began climbing it without hesitation. Following the ball in hot pursuit, I reached one of the outcroppings, putting my weight on it, only to feel the rock crumbling in my hands. I fell backwards, but thankfully landed on my feet. Trying again, I continued, gripping each and every little greeble, but finding that each and every one of them crumbled on contact. "Can they just not support my weight or something?" I inquired, prompting the Eevee to respond almost immediately. "Preliminary analysis indicates that a significant proportion of the wall's composition is mana-based, Cadet Booker. Current scans indicate that mana itself may be acting as the binding agent between sparse solid materials. The armor's inherent properties may be affecting its otherwise rigid composition, hindering its strength." I took a few steps back from the wall, watching as Ping had already climbed to the top, and was now performing some pretty serious feats of parkour along the rest of the long stretch of walls and towers. The rest of the top percentile caught up around this point, as I saw Gummago and Quiv giving Thalman a run for his money, the mercenary prince turning towards me with a level of concern which I shook off, gesturing for him to continue on without me. A few seconds of introspective thought later, and I got it. "Chiska said that we could go through these challenges in whatever way we see fit," I murmured to myself, as I palmed the wall roughly. A moment of hesitation came over me, but just as quickly dissipated as I decided to go through with my idea.
Crunch!
My fist went straight through the wall with a bit of force, as I relished the feeling of crunching rock and crumbling mortar. Heh. I cocked my head. Well, what do you know? I guess we'll be taking a shortcut, Evie. Acknowledged.